Why other Australians don't take Aboriginal people serious. What is your definition of an Aussie? Share your thoughts and opinions on that in the comments section below. Rich in cultural heritage and deep historical importance. Take a look at why a portion of the Australian population continues to overlook and dismiss the Aboriginal people. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It becomes more and more common in Australia to hear this at the beginning of any speech, at any event. It's not just exclusive to formal events. Kids at school start assembly with "Welcome to Country." Whilst doing research on this topic, we found a few things funny and worth mentioning, but before we go ahead, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're sitting on. My landlord, who I pay rent to, jokes. Jokes might have been a bit insensitive on our behalf. Here at Faceless Scenery, we'd like to apologize for the unfunny comment. This is what is known as the acknowledgements of country. The other similar half is the welcome to country. Both the acknowledgement of country and the welcome to country are meant to remind every citizen in the country that the land and waters of Australia on which everyone lives, works, and uses belongs to the Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders. So, long story short, the Aboriginals are the original Australians. However, some people have forgotten this fact or have grown tired of acknowledging it. Now, they just don't care about traditional owners anymore, which is simply surprising given the fact that Aboriginal people, other than being the first Australians, have also been regarded as the custodians of the land, meaning they have been responsible for taking care of and protecting the land. So, if the Aboriginals had such an important role in the country, how could they describe it as unserious? The first argument put forward by some Australian was to debunk the notion that the resources of Australia was taken care of and protected by the Aboriginals. These citizens believe that the role of the Aboriginal people has been idealized as if, without them, the country would have been completely destroyed beyond repair. They also find it ridiculous that people suggest that without Aboriginal people, an entire continent that existed before humans wouldn't be able to look after itself. One person's argument stated, Aboriginal Australians were not really custodians. They were survivors. They didn't protect the land. They made use of it, benefiting from its resources. The source added, Australia has a tough climate. Surviving those conditions would have been really hard, but Aboriginal people managed to do it. They used the resources around them to get by. They weren't taking care of the land. They were digging into it to find food. This wasn't about being custodians. It was about survival, and survival can be harsh. Clearly, people applauded the first Australians for their tenacity and ability to survive in the tough environment that is Australia. But some noted that if, when the Aboriginal people arrived in Australia centuries ago, they had access to technological inventions like building machines, gas stoves, microwaves, plenty of food, and running water, they would have opted for that because humans naturally prefer comfort, and people wouldn't be idealizing their survival skills now. The main reason why this is pointed out was just to dislodge the belief that Aboriginal people were custodians. Rather than calling them custodians, these Australians state that the Aboriginal people were survivors, which is fine and acceptable given the circumstances centuries ago. A second argument why some think the Aboriginal people shouldn't be taken seriously is tied to the prior one, and it concerns the fact that Australia was a fragile continent that needed taken care of. The first source stated that when the first Australians first arrived, Australia was full of life. It was larger, greener, and home to giant iguanas, kangaroos, and koalas. However, about 45,000 years ago, studies suggest that humans played a role in the extinction of these prehistoric giant animals. So, Australia was thriving before people came to the land. The land didn't need caretakers. Aboriginal people were migrants, just like many migrants who came to the land many years after. A third point about why the indigenous population of Australia isn't well respected has to do with the unflattering statistics. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population is about 1 million, which is about 4% of Australians' total population. While this news is positive, the source of the third argument is reports from a show, and it stated that First Nation women are the fastest growing group being sent to prison. Why are the Aboriginals not taken seriously? Because according to some Australians, First Nation women are committing more crimes and therefore going to prison more often. From a source that stated, on any given night, 4 out of 10 women in prison are Indigenous, even though they make up only 2.5% of the adult female population. Some people explained how the media often pretends these convicts as victims of systemic issues that push them into crime, and despite government efforts to reduce these problems. And they added that the National Indigenous Times reported that the government once spent $4 billion on remote housing across several communities of Aboriginal people to prevent any talk of neglect. Other people talked about how partial the country's justice system is. A source stated, it seems that people who claim to be Aboriginal are more likely to get bail compared to those who don't. This doesn't seem fair or equal. Another person said, this shows that Aboriginal people are treated more leniently than others. Even with softer treatment, the rate of incarceration is still going up. Clearly, being lenient isn't working. The fact that a person pretended to be Aboriginal suggests that criminals know about the special treatment Aboriginal people get in the justice system. Otherwise, why would they lie about it? These arguments come from various places in the country, showing that a significant amount of people have truly gotten less empathetic towards the Aboriginals. Why do Indigenous Australians attach themselves to BLM movement? Is it for clout? Is it for TV coverage internationally? Or generally because they tick black as their race and their lives matter too? Why do they draw a Palestinian flag onto their protest posters? Do they really think Palestinians even know there's such a thing as Indigenous Australians? And even so, do you think they care about Indigenous Australians? Lastly, we found it funny how 2 weeks or a week before Australia Day, Indigenous Australians cause havoc online, from bullying and threatening local businesses against celebrating and posting about Australia Day, which they call Invasion Day. But by the 28th of January, they're back to their regular scheduling, back to supporting and frequently those places they harassed. So, everyone's woke online. However, can't fight the good fight. Instead, resort to manipulative tactics. Or, there's a reason for all of this. So, how are Australians supposed to take Indigenous Australians serious when, as a whole, they've yet to dedicate 90 days to march for the indifferences they see amongst themselves and others? Why can't they do it old school like other black nations have? This lack of serious consideration and respect for Aboriginal people in Australia reveals deep-seated issues within the society. While efforts such as acknowledgements of country and other gestures try to remind everyone constantly of the cultural significance of the first Australians, these gestures often fail to achieve that goal and has been termed insincere by some Indigenous individuals. Calling the fact that Aboriginal people are custodians or a romanticized expression clearly trivializes the fact that the first people who came to Australia had to survive under very difficult conditions. This part of their history becomes overly simplified, and the misrepresentation affects how they are treated in today's society. And on the issue of a lenient justice system, those are simply not correct. It is important for all Australians to pursue unity with each other through mutual respect, whether they came to the country hundreds of years ago or 10 years ago. Lastly, what do you think viewers think is the reason Indigenous Australians never fought for the land back like the rest of the nations that were oppressed and colonized? Is it too late to fight as it's 2024, or should they give it a crack and see where it leads them? Thanks for watching. Turn on post notifications. We'll be dropping more content on Australian-related affairs soon.